Hi, I want to thank the Wheat Foods Council for letting me share with you one of my most favorite teaching recipes that I've used over the years. It's 100% whole wheat bread, and it's found at the Kansas Wheat Commission's website. They are a member of the Wheat Foods Council. That would be at kswheat.com. 100% whole wheat bread. This bread is great because beginners that I've taught as well as adults can all do this. It starts with the basics of any bread, which are yeast, water, salt, and flour. In this case, we're using hard white wheat flour instead of the hard red winter wheat flour that we sometimes use. The reason we're using it is because it's slightly sweeter, it's slightly lighter, and it appeals to our American taste buds. First of all, temperature is important. You'll see thermometers here, and when you're baking bread, if you can keep the water and liquid temperatures to about room temperature, that is about 80 degrees, that's a good temperature rather than trying to bump up the fermentation too fast. So I've added the water, 1 cup of water, to 2 packages of active dry yeast, and it's already foamed up. You can see that. That's what we're looking for. If you use the fast rising yeast, you won't have to do this dissolving step. From there, we're going to add a full cup of milk, which I've scalded. And scalding is when you can see that skin form on the top. We get rid of that skin and we add that in with the proofed yeast. The reason you scald has nothing to do with bacteria. It has everything to do with stopping enzymatic action. So we have here right now, if we took the temperature, our temperature of liquids is right at 85 degrees, which is what I want. It could be a little cooler, but when we add the butter, and of course you could use shortening or oil, but butter will give it a great flavor, the honey, or you could be using granulated sugar or brown sugar or molasses, depending on what kind of flavor you most want. Add that in. This bread is pretty sweet, having a whole 1/4 of a cup to a 1/3 of a cup of honey. So you keep in mind you can bump that back. It could be 0 sugar if you wanted it to be. But the sugar, the butter, both add shelf life to this. Now the beauty of this recipe is that it's a sponge and dough process. Instead of just having the dough mixed beginning to end all at one time, this batter is actually a little over half the flour, which is all whole wheat, a white wheat, the milk, the water, the yeast, the sugar or honey, and then 2 eggs, which help also to develop the gluten strength or low volume. So this step actually takes 3 minutes. You stir or put it on the mixer and mix it for 3 minutes, or a little longer if you want, or do it by hand, and just gives you another piece of that active lifestyle that is so good for us. So I'm going to mix this for 3 minutes and just keep stirring and stirring until pretty soon that butter will just mix itself in, and we'll go from there. The sponge, which is what I'm mixing right now, will set covered, and you always want to keep your dough or batter covered for 30 minutes at room temperature. Now let's say you're really busy and you need to cut and run. You could actually refrigerate this sponge. And if you do that, you just want to be sure you get back before it actually proofs or ferments right out of the bowl. The sponge then that was mixed with half the flour, roughly 3 cups, cup of milk, cup of water, yeast, and sugar or honey, and butter is well mixed now. You can see that it's starting to poof up a little, puff up. That fermentation means that that whole batter is getting infused with yeast budding and beginning to grow. You can see it's already stretchier just based on the fact that it's had even 15 minutes of this sponge process. Now we're going to take that sponge and stir it down and work in the last 2 ingredients, which are the remaining whole wheat flour and the salt. Now I pre-measured, and by measuring I'm going to just quick give you a lesson in measurement on flour. You pre-measure the flour by spooning it in the cup and leveling it off. This step's important because it keeps the flour fluffy. Keeps you from adding bunches more flour than you really do need in the process. Scales are great because you can be entirely accurate that way. So every cup of whole wheat flour is right at 4 1/4 ounces of flour. So this recipe will use about 22 ounces total flour for 16 ounces of liquid. So you add the flour 1 cup at a time, kind of toss that in. You add the salt at the very end if possible. That sounds crazy, but it actually is important not to get the salt in any sooner than possible because that retards the fermentation process, and we want to get a really good start on the fermentation. So we're stirring in the flour. You're going to see a change in this dough. It's going to become, there just added the salt. It's going to become thicker, lumpier, and it's going to start clumping up, become a rough mass. And this process you can do again if you want to use a mixer, dough hook, or spiral dough attachments. So you see it lumping up. Now that now is 5 cups of flour total. You can still see wet spots in it. You know that you're going to go ahead and add probably that extra half cup of flour that the recipe calls for. I'm going to do that though. I'm going to put half of that in first, and then I'm going to coat this dough ball with flour because truthfully it's getting really hard to mix. So what I want to do is I want to literally dump it out and start kneading it. See how loose it is in the bowl? And so I'm ready to put the last about 1/4 of a cup of flour. I'm going to just reserve back a little extra from there and turn the dough out onto the counter. Now if we talk about temperature again, the dough right now is right at room temperature, meaning it's about 78 degrees. It feels cool to my touch. And that's good. We want it to be not fermenting too fast. The slower the fermentation, the better the end result for most breads. Now, the kneading process then doesn't have to be totally uncomfortable. You can coat the dough with a little skiff of flour. That's a made-up word, I think. My students always tell me. So you're going to knead by pushing, folding, turning, fold, turn, 1/4 turn each turn. If you're kneading by hand, you're going to need about 10 minutes with whole grain bread. If you're on a mixer, it might be slightly less than that. But you're going to slowly see this dough transform into a dough that's smooth and elastic. Now what you want to note is that I'm not adding very much flour, only enough to handle the dough. So you do have to put up with just a little bit of dough on your hands, but eventually, once you're through kneading, that's going to just all clean off your hands too. And if you're doing it on a mixer, it'll start picking up and cleaning the bowl. And the bowl will end up just shiny clean by the time you're through kneading. So I'm going to keep this up now for about 7 more minutes. When you're through kneading, you're going to let the dough actually ferment and raise till double in size. So you can do this in the refrigerator, you can do it in the bowl it was in, but you always keep it covered with a very clean, non-terry towel that's been dampened. And you keep that covered and in just room temperature. About 80 degrees is great. If you put it in the fridge, it's going to double up. You're going to punch it, and then it'll come back up again. And you can actually let it do this a couple times. It's doubling, punching, doubling, until you're ready to shape the dough, which is the next step I'm going to show you. If you want perfectly divided dough, you'll weigh the dough and actually scale it, which is what a baker would do. In this case, I'm going to just basically use my hands as a scale, and it feels pretty even. Let me quickly show you how to do the round loaf. And just keep in mind that no fancy baking pan is necessary. You could bake your round loaf on a plate that will go in the oven, tolerate oven heat. You can also put it on a pizza pan if you want, or in this case I used a pie plate. So you take that rested, relaxed dough and you just round it up and you flatten it once just to be sure you get all the air bubbles out, and then you kind of flip it over and use the counter to help you round it. And as you round it, your hand is basically pinching it on the bottom. So when you end up with this nice smooth skin all the way around the surface of the dough, and at the bottom you pinch that good. And that's the pinched part is what goes down. You never want that on top because that will just open up in the oven otherwise. So that rounded pinched bottom goes on your flat pan. And again, then you're going to cover it with a towel or saran, kind of a plastic wrap if you want, that's been sprayed with oil. You can just lay that out and keep it covered until it's doubled in size. That will take somewhere around 45 minutes. If you can, if you have an environment that's as warm as 100 degrees, you can put that in there and proof this shaped bread at 100 degrees. And that's not bad either, because that's really going to let it raise faster than just room temperature, especially when the dough is cold. Now, pan bread, you want the dough to actually be about the width of the pan. You can see the pan lined up here. And I'm using just a dowel rod. This is great for kids. These are what my students use. And that dowel rod flattens it out to get the bubbles all out of that dough. Square up the ends, roll it up. Good. This is just exactly what a factory-made product would do. There'd be a piece of machinery that would roll the dough up. The bottom side, where the seam comes together, has to be pinched in this case, smoothed up, and placed in the pan. Ends pinched, and there's your dough. This weighs about 18 to 20 ounces to make a little over 1 pound loaf of bread. Here's what that one looks like once it's raised. Almost doubled, ready to bake. Before the round loaves go in the oven, you need to slash the surface. That allows the dough to expand without cracking or bursting the sides of that round loaf. A pan loaf doesn't need that. It won't need any slashing or treatment on top. So to do that, you just take a very nice serrated, or if you have a baker's tool to slash with, you can use that too. But you're going to cut that about 1/4 of an inch deep. And you can make an attractive design, whatever you want on the top, just before baking. So these are ready. These two are ready to go in the oven. I can tell that by doing a test. I can see that if I touch that lightly on the side, it leaves an indentation. It doesn't just spring back out. It's also twice as big, a little more than twice as big as when I started. Thank you for taking time to listen. I encourage you to go to wheatfoods.org for a whole variety of flour information, as well as downloadable fact sheets on grain foods. And also go to homebaking.org. You'll find the information on troubleshooting, temperatures, glossary as well on bread baking. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.